was younger, we frequently visited my grandparents around holidays, even though we didn't live in the same town. My aunt lived 2 houses down from my grandparents. The lady in the house between was creepy. She was a large woman, over 6 feet. She wore logging chains around her neck, a dress, and work boots. The only time I remember seeing her outside was either in her garden in the back or when she was washing the outside of her house, scrubbing the actual building. She did this often. During these times, she would yell at us kids and call us all kinds of things. She would tell us the devil would be coming for us. The adults told us to leave her alone and to avoid her. We would run the distance between my aunts and my grandparents because when you passed by, she was watching out the windows. It was creepy and we never went alone. One Halloween, one of the cousins dared us to trick or treat her house. I remember how scared I was, but I didn't want to be a chicken. Plus, I was going with the group. One of us rang the doorbell and there was a lot of banging, noises in the house suddenly like doors slamming. When she answered the door, she had a severed head in her hands and we all went screaming. The adults told us it was a Halloween prop, and we knew we shouldn't be bothering her and deserved to be scared. About a month later, my parents got a phone call that the lady had tried to kill my aunt while she was bringing in groceries and had my young cousin in her arms. The lady had one of them rope saws and had come up behind my aunt with it. She put it over her head and around her neck and proceeded to saw. My aunt naturally flipped and started kicking the door. My uncle came and beat the lady down with a fire poker. The police investigation revealed that the woman had been digging tunnels under her home, which were coming up under my aunt's, my grandparents', and another neighbor's house. She had been bringing the dirt up and putting it in the raised beds of the gardens. She also had a shrine of some sort underground, which had a few severed heads around it. My aunt survived, by the way, but has a long scar across her neck. On Halloween night, back when I was in 8th grade, I'm 27 now, my friend Kayla and I were giddying with excitement, messing around and getting dressed up in our costumes. I'm not even going to say what we were for that. Halloween, it's too cringy. Anyway, this night was a special night for us girls because this was going to be the last year for us to go trick-or-treating. We thought that once we became freshmen in high school, trick-or-treating would be too childish for the new cool high school students to be participating in. So we were going all out, especially with the amount of candy, grabbing pillowcases that we planned to fill entirely. We practically skipped out my front door ready to begin. In our opinion, the greatest night and holiday of the year. We didn't waste any time going door to door, street after street, that we didn't even realize that hours had passed. Back during this time, the trick or treating time was a hell of a lot longer than the 2 or 3 hours it is now. Back then, it just ended when the kids decided to end it. I can remember one year my sister Kayla and I stayed out to almost 11 p.m. Most of the houses would have already stopped answering their doors, but there was always a few houses still willing to pass out candy. I didn't even think to look at the time until I noticed that there were less and less kids each street we came to. So when I looked at my phone, I said to Kayla, "Holy shit, it's 9:30. We should probably get back to my house. We can watch a movie and stuff ourselves with this." Proudly lifting up my pillowcase that was at least more than halfway full, we slowly start walking back towards my house, and as we were passing each street, we noticed how eerily quiet it had gotten, seemingly out of nowhere. People were turning off their porch lights, signaling they were not going to be passing out any more candy. Now, I was a paranoid person back then, and I'm still a paranoid person to this day, probably even more so now. So when I got that feeling, that chill that runs up your back and your shoulders tense up, something is off, I thought to myself. I look side to side and get an urge to look behind me. I slowly turned my head around, looking over my shoulder, and what I saw nearly made me piss myself. About 4 houses down from us was Michael Myers, or someone dressed as Michael Myers, I should say, who was slowly walking behind us. But to me, at that time, it might as well be the real Michael Myers. He stopped, staring back at me, not moving any muscle, just staring. Now, this would be creepy to anyone, but this was literally my worst fucking nightmare. My #1 childhood fear just so happens to be Michael Myers. A little backstory. When I was about 4, my mom was busy cleaning the kitchen as I sat in the living room playing with my toys with the TV going in the background. The creepy music had caught my attention, so I started glancing up at the movie while playing with my toys. I grew less and less interested in my toys and had my eyes glued to the TV, already starting to grow nervous and scared by just the music alone. You know the part in the movie where Michael Myers pops out of the closet, grabbing a hold of the victim and lifting him up in the air against the wall as his victim desperately tries to break free, but is paralyzed with fear. And then Michael pulls back the knife and brutally stabs the guy to the wall, pinning him to the wall and in the air. Well, my 4-year-old self had never seen something so gruesome and altogether just absolutely terrifying. And at that age, I believed it was real. In my 4-year-old mind, this was really happening to someone. My eyes bulged out of my head, instantly breaking out into tears, literally screaming my head off. His mask, the brutality, seeing someone being stabbed in this heinous murder, blew my mind, and all at once I felt so anxious, scared, sad, just panicking. My mom comes rushing over, frantically trying to figure out what is wrong, scooping me up in her arms, and I was still screaming, and pointed at the TV. By then, the movie continued to the part where Michael Myers is dressed up with the sheet over his body, with the glasses on over the sheet that he stole off the body of the victim, obviously pretending to be the guy he just murdered. The sheet freaked me out even more than Michael's mask. Watching the masked killer walking slowly closer and closer up behind the girl on the phone, and I clung to my mom, sobbing and burying my face into her shoulder. She looked over at the TV saying, "Oh my God, how the hell did this get on?" "It's okay, shh. It's okay, honey, you're okay," trying to soothe me as she turned the channel off. I cried for at least an hour or more, just absolutely traumatized. After that incident, I couldn't sleep at all, especially alone in my bed, and absolutely could not stand the dark. I knocked on my parents' bedroom door for months, begging them to let me sleep in their bed with them, or I swear. In my head, I was convinced he was going to come down the dark hallway, silently creeping into my room and stab me in my sleep. I did not get over my fear of Michael Myers until I was in my early 20s. So being in 8th grade, walking down a dark street, no one around besides just Kay and I, and seeing my absolute worst fucking nightmare walking slowly behind us, I swear I thought I was going to pass out. I looked over at Kayla, my voice trembling, and whispered, "There is somebody following us. He's dressed as Michael Myers, about 4 houses down. Pick up the pace, but do not start running." Kayla turned, looking slightly over her shoulder, and snapped her head back forward. "What the hell? That's so creepy." "Well, we got 2 blocks to go. We'll see if he follows us when we turn." I nod, a million thoughts going through my head. Maybe I'm overreacting. It is Halloween after all. But why is he alone? And to follow 2 young girls? When we get to my street, I glance behind me, and I swear my heart stopped in that moment. He wasn't behind us anymore. I panicked, darting my eyes all around me. Oh my God, where did he go? "He's gone!" Kayla turns around, stopping in her tracks, squinting her eyes, trying to scan the area. Maybe he turned down a different street. "He probably wasn't even following us to begin with," she said as she spun back around, heading down the street again. And then I spotted him. He stepped out from behind a tree, but now he was only 2 houses away. He started walking towards us, gaining on us as I stood there, frozen in fear. I screamed, "Go!" Kayla whipped around. "Holy shit! Oh my God, oh my God." We shrieked as we started sprinting the rest of the way. But then I feel my legs start to wobble. Oh God, please no. This can't be real, it just can't be. I thought to myself, somewhat in denial, that this was actually happening. Could this really be happening? In that moment, I knew I had one goal, and that was to make it through my front door. We sprint up my driveway. Both of us practically crashed into my front door, frantically turning the doorknob, and then my heart dropped. The door was locked. I'm pounding and pounding on the door, screaming for somebody to please hurry and open the door. I look behind me, and there he is, stepping onto the driveway, still heading straight for us. Where is everybody? Please, Mom, help us. I glance back behind me, and he's gone. I went silent, listening intently for any noise, when all of a sudden, he slowly came around the side of my house just a few feet away. This means he walked around the left side of my house, through my backyard and came around the right side of my house. I screamed while practically falling through the door. My mom looked at us like we were insane, and I yelled, "Close the door!" Kayla slammed it shut and looks out the window. "Where is he? Where did he go?" Kayla said, running to look out the front living room windows. "Who? What are you talking about?" My mom said, looking at me completely confused. "Someone was following us. It was someone dressed as Michael Myers." "No, don't!" I yelled as my mom opened the door and stepped outside, peering around the front yard. She stepped out to the driveway. I nervously watched out the screen door. She turned and yelled back to me, "Well, there's no one now. It may have been just someone messing with you." This thought did cross my mind. It is Halloween after all. But to think a grown man, I'm assuming, is walking around alone messing with two young girls. Stalking them for so long is just extremely creepy. I have to say, since I'm older now and have seen the movies at least 1,000,000 times, that stalker guy was 100% spot on with exactly how Michael is in the movies. The walking slowly but gaining on us so fast at the same time, disappearing and popping up out of nowhere. Like I said, it may as well have been the real Michael Myers, but also the fact that this scenario was my #1 childhood fear, that I've had multiple nightmares about. And even though I'm much older now, reminiscing that night still gives me chills till this day. It's just, I can't help but wonder if it really was actually a prank gone too far, or if that person had more sinister intentions in store for us. I'll never trick or treat again. In deep Appalachia, Halloween night comes with rules. I've lived my entire life in a holler on the outskirts of Wyoming County, West Virginia, deep in the mountains of Appalachia. It's a place so remote most folks don't even know it exists on a map. Just a handful of families in dense, unforgiving woods. This place doesn't have neighborhoods, doesn't have sidewalks, and most definitely does not have trick-or-treaters on Halloween. Halloween isn't a holiday here. It's a test. My family and the others who've lived here long enough to know follow a set of rules on Halloween night. It's not tradition or superstition, it's survival. Those who didn't follow the rules didn't live long enough to tell anyone about it. Our rules aren't just about keeping doors locked or avoiding dark places. They're specific, with reasons rooted in events we don't talk about. My dad always said they came from my great-grandmother's time, when people came to these mountains from Scotland and still believed in the old ways. Whether it's spirits or something else that's out there, or things just too old to name, Halloween night here has always been a game of life and death. And each rule existed to give you just enough of an edge to make it through till morning. The first time I broke a rule, I learned why they exist, and I'll never forget it. Every October, around the second week, the rules went up on the fridge. We lived by them. My family took them seriously. And not just in a keep the kids safe kind of way, no. These rules were for everyone. Break one and you'd put us all in danger. Here's how they go. See, if you hear 3 knocks at the door after sunset, do not answer. 2, if you hear a single hard knock, open the door. But do not look at who stands there. Hold out a basket of freshly baked bread and wait until you hear the footsteps leaving to shut the door. 3, if you hear someone call your name from the woods, do not answer. 4, if you see a figure at the tree line wearing a wide-brimmed hat, do not look at him for longer than 1 second. 5, if you hear chains dragging on the ground, sprinkle salt on all windowsills and door thresholds within 1 minute. 6, if a candle is burning in the window of the old, abandoned Anderson cabin up the hill, stay indoors no matter what. These rules didn't exist for no reason. They were handed down because bad things had happened. People vanished, people died, and strange things occurred. That's just how it was. I remember one specific year, years back, when Halloween night fell on a full moon. The air felt different, charged. My dad had a sense for when things were going to be bad. You could just feel it in the holler, thick in the air, like something breathing down your neck. Dad told us to get all the preparations done early. Salt the windows now, he instructed, standing by the door, his face tight with worry. We're not waiting for the chains. I followed his orders without question, pouring salt along each windowsill and at the front and back door thresholds. My brother was baking bread, already anticipating rule number 2. the one we hated the most. It was the one that forced us to interact with whatever knocked. Whatever stood on the other side of that door. We never knew who or what it was, but we knew if you didn't offer bread, or if you dared to look, it wouldn't be good. By late afternoon, the house was fortified. The bread was cooling on the counter, its smell filling the kitchen. The fire was lit, burning low, and a 12-gauge lay across Dad's lap like it always did on Halloween. Isaac, my younger brother, sat closest to the window, glancing out every now and then. We had about 3 hours before sunset. The rules were clear. Everything bad happened after dark, but the waiting was the worst part. The longer we sat there, the more anxious we became. "Did we use enough salt this year?" Isaac asked quietly. Dad didn't answer. He just stared into the fire, gripping the gun tighter. That was answer enough. The first knock came just after dark. A single knock, slow and deliberate. Isaac and I froze, staring at the door. Dad stood up, motioning for us to stay back and be quiet. I swallowed hard, heart pounding in my chest. It was time to follow Rule 2. Without a word, Dad picked up the basket of bread from the counter. Freshly baked, still warm. He walked to the door, resting one hand on the knob. "Remember," he said, his voice low and steady. "Don't look." He opened the door just wide enough to slip the basket through the crack. His eyes focused on the floor. The warm smell of the bread wafted out, and I could hear a faint shuffling on the porch. Whoever, or whatever it was out there. I saw a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye, a shadow stretching across the porch, but I didn't dare look. Dad held the basket out, his hand shaking slightly. For a few heartbeats there was no sound, no movement, and then footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps retreating from the porch. He waited until they faded completely, then shut the door quietly, locking it tight. Isaac let out a breath. "Why don't we just leave the bread out early? Why do we have to wait for the knock?" Dad's face was pale and his eyes were hard. "We have to wait for the knock. And if we don't answer the knock, it'll come in." We thought it was over. We had followed Rule 2 to the letter, and for a moment it seemed like things were quiet. But here, nothing stays quiet for long on Halloween. Isaac was the first to notice him. He was standing at the edge of the woods, just where the trees meet the clearing. He was tall and thin, a wide-brimmed hat casting his face in shadow. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, but he was there, watching. Isaac gasped, pointing. "It's him," he whispered, voice trembling. Dad didn't need to ask who. He knew, we all did. "The man in the hat." "Don't look at him," Dad snapped. Not for more than a second. I glanced, just enough to confirm he was there. A tall, dark figure, almost blending into the shadows of the trees, but distinct enough to make my blood run cold. I looked away quickly, heart hammering in my chest. We got away from the doors and windows of the house, and sat huddled in the living room, the fire our only light. Outside, the man in the hat stood at the tree line, unmoving as the night crept on. It wasn't until after midnight that we heard the chains. At first it was faint, a metallic clinking that seemed distant, almost like it could have been the wind. But it grew louder, closer, until it was unmistakable, the sound of chains being dragged across the rocky ground outside. Isaac's face turned pale. He shot me a look, wide-eyed and terrified. "The salt," he whispered. Dad nodded grimly. "Go check." I got up slowly, trying to control the tremor in my legs. I circled the house, inspecting every window and doorframe. The salt lines were intact. Nothing had disturbed them. The chains continued to scrape outside, dragging closer and closer, but we didn't dare open the door. We didn't dare look. We stayed inside, sitting together in the flickering light of the fire, listening to the sound of the chains, until the first light of dawn broke through the windows. We had made it through the night. The man in the hat was gone. The chains had stopped, but as the morning light seeped through the shutters, I glanced toward the old Anderson cabin up the hill, and there it was. A single candle still burning in the window. The rules are clear. When the candle burns in the Anderson cabin, you stay inside. No exceptions, no excuses. Even with the sun beginning to shine, and the birds beginning to chirp, the sight of that candle filled me with a primal fear. We have to wait until the candle goes out before we can go outside, before the night is truly over. And that's how it goes here. The rules aren't just there to be followed. They're there to keep you alive. And if you're smart, you don't ask questions. Sometimes, it's better not to know. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more scary videos. Until we meet again.